G'day YouTubers. I recently put an extra transducer on my boat so that my downrigger can bottom track, and I've got another sounder unit on my boat as well. I'll have videos on installing them up later on. I'm still trying to come to terms with this bottom tracking thing. It's not quite right in this video, which is why I was out there testing it, and I'm still trying to get both my fish finders tuned in. While I was testing it all out, I thought I'd do this, mapping the West Peel Artificial Reef. Some of the marks will be public structures and some are other structures that are down there, and some are just fish that are out in the open. Seems to me a lot of people just go out to that reef and fish and they've got no idea what else is around. So I just thought, if you don't know, I'll show you what else is around, and you might have a bit of a sound around and find some other stuff for yourself as well. Now this first one's a public mark, and as you can see from what I've circled here, the actual structure is about 65 feet to the right of the waypoint flag that I've got in the side imaging, and a little bit behind where it is too. Hard to tell how far behind, but it's about 65 feet away from the transducer, and if we look in the down image we can see that we're in 43 feet of water, so that puts it roughly 10 to 15 feet to the right of the boat, or to the right of the waypoint flag. If you understand how side imaging works, it's distance from the transducer that it's reading, and because it's on the bottom, you've got to sort of do the trigonometry to work it out, but in round figures, roughly about 10-15 feet to the right of the boat. This next one's another public mark, and I am tweaking my settings as I go, so that's why things look a bit different. I've got a really good paint on the side imaging on this structure, and it's pretty much where the mark says it should be. As you can see, the traditional sonar image has got a bit of interference in it with the current settings, but you can see the bait balls around the structure, and in the side image you can see there's some fish there as well. I just threw in a couple of images off my new sounder. As you can see, there's something out there at these marks. I haven't got it tuned in well enough to know whether it's structure or fish yet. I think it might be one of structure and one of fish, but I'm not sure. There was something there at the time anyway. However, the sounder itself does look like it's promising once I get it all figured out. Now this structure is offset just a little bit from a public mark. As you can see, we've passed directly over it in the side imaging, and in the traditional sonar you can see there's quite a bit of bait hanging around it. I don't see much in the way of bigger fish, but you can drop your sabiki down there and get some live bait. This one's another published mark, and this time it's spot on the structure. You can see that in the side imaging. The structure is directly underneath us, and it looks like there might be some bigger fish hunting around the bait. There's certainly a couple of bigger fish marked in the side imaging up in the water column. This is another mark I've found. I've been over it a few times and I always paint something there. Sometimes there's some bait hanging around it, sometimes not, but I always find some structure on the bottom. It's only a little patch, but it does attract some fish, and if it attracts a bait, sooner or later there's going to be some big fish hanging around the bait having a feed. Now this one's another published mark, although we don't quite agree on the coordinates for it. I think the coordinates are a little bit different to those published. As you can see, it's off to the left of the boat. I didn't quite pass over top of it. Really interesting thing about this image though is the arrow is pointing to quite a large fish that is at least 100 feet away from the structure, so it's about 30 meters away from the structure. And what that shows us is that you don't have to be right on top of the structure to catch the biggest fish. I think this is another published mark, although I don't agree with the exact coordinates of it. As you can see, it's about 15 feet off to the right of the boat in the side imaging. While I don't see any fish around it, that could be my settings on the side imaging. I'm still playing with them, and I didn't pass over top of it, so I didn't get a sonar scan of it. This is another mark I haven't seen published anywhere. As you can see, there's quite a lot of structure on the bottom in the side imaging, and quite a bit of bait hanging around it in the sonar scan. It looks like there just might be some fish hanging around it on the side scan, but I'm not confident enough in my tuning of that to say yay or nay for certain. Now here's an interesting thing I see from time to time, and that is a fairly large bait ball just sitting on the bottom, but there's no obvious structure to attract it. So as you're cruising around, just keep your eye open for that and have your sabiki rig ready. This one shows a couple of very small and very isolated pieces of structure. I think someone might have snagged one of the boxes that make up the artificial reef and dragged it out of position, and there it landed when the line snapped. The boxes themselves are quite small, and I've actually pulled one to the surface on an 80-pound line. Of course, I dropped it straight back down immediately, hoping it would land close to the same spot, but given currents and everything, it probably got washed aside a bit as well. This is another published mark, although I disagree slightly on its positioning as usual. Just bear in mind that every GPS will give you a slightly different position. There's a margin of error in every position, and I think it's still in the order of about 30 feet in Australia. Over in the US, where they've got the special DGPS and all the other systems to enhance the GPS signal, I think it gets down to about 5 feet. This is another fairly large piece of structure, and I think it's an unpublished mark, or the published mark is a long way off from where it actually is. It's holding quite a bit of bait, and there's possibly a larger fish on the right hand side of the traditional sonar view. Here's another bit of structure on the bottom which I've marked. It's close to, but not quite at the same coordinates as a published mark. It's holding a bit of bait at the moment, but no large fish as I can see. Now, there's no structure to be seen in this image, but I threw it in because there's a couple of good sized fish shown on the sonar, and you can see them in the side view as well. And if you look in the GPS view, we're nowhere near any structure. And yet again, it shows you can be a fair distance away from some structure and still run into some big fish. And this is another mark that I haven't seen published anywhere. It shows a bit of structure on the bottom, but there's not a great deal in the way of fish when I made this pass. I have seen fish there at other times. Here's another one showing some bait fish on the bottom, and it's not near any of the published marks. A little bit of structure there, I think. But it just goes to show there's things to find on the bottom that's worth having a bit of a scan around, see what's around outside the publicly available marks. Well, this was actually a boating day, and since we got down there a little bit earlier, that's why I'm trying out the downrigger in bottom tracking mode and having a bit of a scan around to see what structure I can find. But once it was time to leave, we were heading around into Horseshoe Bay for a picnic, and on the way I thought I'd scan the Peel houseboat wreck. Came up really well in the side vision. Not terribly happy with the down vision and the normal sonar scans. I think I need to tweak those settings a little bit more. 3D looks pretty good. Down vision did show a few fish around it. Had we not been going for a picnic, I would have dropped the line down and just to see what they were. A little bit southeast of the Peel houseboat wreck, there's an underwater hill. Now, I've never really caught anything worthwhile there, but I've always managed to get a little bit of bait when I throw the sabiki rig over. You'll also pick up a lot of small squire and that, so make sure you throw them back if you get them, but there is bait fish down there as well. Maybe one day I'll pull up something worthwhile, but I'm not going to hold my breath. And finally, this is a sounder shot from up in the shallows on the southwest reef. I went into about 10 feet of water under the transducer. Don't need to go any shallower than that. And there's quite often a lot of bait fish going through there. Again, drop the sabiki rod over. Don't let the sinker touch the bottom because there's a lot of brain coral there and you're guaranteed to get a snag. So try and keep your sinker off the bottom and just jig it a little bit. You'll pull up some bait most of the time. Or I should say, most of the time on the right run of the tide. And that's it for another video. I hope you got something out of it. I plan to do some more of this style of video because I'm trying to learn how to use the downrigger for trolling. I'm trying to use hard bodies and soft bodies with it, and it takes a lot of time trolling around at very low speed, so while I'm doing that I'll be gathering some marks and putting them up on a video as well. So if you'd like to catch those videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click that notification button so you're notified when a new video goes up. Thanks for taking the time to watch. Until next time, good fishing.